Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about getting started with Ruby and SingleStore stored procedures. Here's an example repo that we can use to get started really quickly. To get started, it's just 3 easy steps. First, we'll sign up for a SingleStore license. This is free. Second, we'll spin up a SingleStore cluster, either in the cloud, in virtual machines, or in containers. Today we'll use the managed service to do that. Third, we'll run our application. Let's do it. First, sign up for a SingleStore license. We'll come here, we'll fill out the form. Once we click the link in the email, we'll land here on the customer portal. We can look at our SingleStore managed clusters here, and we can look at the free tier licenses and other details with our account. I've spun up a SingleStore cluster previously, and we can look here and open SingleStore Studio. I'll log in. And now we can see the details of our cluster as managed by SingleStore. I'm going to click over to the SQL editor and let's create some content. Here in our repository, we have an init.sql. Let's copy all that content, set it in place. First step, let's go create a database. I can hit Control-Enter to run this command. Let's use that database. I'll hit Control-Enter, and then create a table. Now let's create some stored procedures. We'll switch the delimiter and then use that content to create all of the stored procedures. We have a stored procedure for create, read, update, and delete. Now let's create an initial one. We got back ID 1. Our database is working great. Step 1 is done. Step 2 is done. Now let's adjust the connection details in our application and install it. Here in the portal, I can see that this is the endpoint for my application. I'm going to copy that and come back in here to our application. We can see that we're using the standard MySQL 2 gem to be able to connect. Here is our connection details. Our host is that host in SingleStore Managed Studio. Our username in this case is admin, password, the password that we entered as we created the cluster, and the database that we just created. This application will create, read, update, read all, and delete a row. Let's try it out. Ruby app.rb, and we can see that it did all of the processes. Let's take a look at the code and see what it does. We create a new connection and then use that connection to create a new row. Here's the content that we'll insert for that row. Then we'll read that row back out by ID. If we find the row, we'll output that row. Otherwise, we'll show that that row is missing. Next, we'll update the row, change it from inserted row to updated row. The updated row ID is outputted. And then we'll read all the rows. Here we'll show not only the row that we just created and updated, but also all the data in our database. Finally, we'll delete the row that we just created by ID. Let's look at each of the processes. First step, we pass in our client and the content, call messages create. We're going to pass in a question mark here rather than concatenating the strings together to protect ourselves from SQL injection. Execute that statement, and let's get back that ID that we created. Perfect. Read 1. We'll call into the read by ID store procedure and we'll get back the first row. Cool. Read all. We're going to call the read all store procedure, get back all of the result sets, and return them. And finally, update. We're going to update this message, passing in the ID and the content that we need to update. Finally, we'll delete. We'll call messages delete, and that will take care of all the processes. So here in this application, create, read 1, update that row, read all, and delete. Let's run the application again and see how it works. We started by inserting the row. Then we read the row. Here's that row that we read, ID number 3. We updated the row, so no longer does it say inserted row, it now says updated row. But we also see the original row we created when we created the database. And finally, we deleted the row. This works great. You can get started with SingleStore and Ruby today. Fork this repo using the link in the description below. Thanks for watching.